I suggest to wait a few more minutes until people get joined. I think we have enough time today. No need to hurry.
Who is that, Carlos?
Hi.
So I thought Johnny Depp is now a big OpenWhisk fan.
Yeah. So
Carlos of the Caribbean.
Docker has captains, right?
Yeah.
I'm the captain in Docker, so I decided in OpenWhisk and serverless we're the pirates, serverless pirates.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Pirates are better than captains.
Okay, I would say we have a quorum. Matt, are you ready? This meeting is recorded, right? Okay, good. So welcome everybody to today's interchange meeting. We have a short agenda today. I have 2 topics, but as you know, we can have a free talk for all topics that come in your mind, so feel free to bring them up. So let's start with introduction and new faces. So let me check with you. Okay, we have Johnny Depp now. Johnny, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Jack. I'm Carlos. Work for IBM and I'm in OpenWhisk. I think we can skip regular folks.
Any background story why you're having the hat on today?
Halloween is approaching, so
Nice.
the house decorated and everything. I have the fog machine also, so.
Okay. Good. So any other new faces?
Let's see, Martin.
Okay.
Angela and Belinda, I think. I don't know if they've been on before.
Hi, this is Belinda, and also Dave and Adnan. We're in a room in Austin. Can you guys hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool.
With IBM, by the way.
Yeah, so you're working for IBM, and can you tell you which area you are currently looking on in OpenWhisk?
Sure. Yep. So obviously we work for IBM, and then I'm currently working on a couple of new features. So primarily around some new blueprints work, which we'll be talking about probably in a future meeting here. And then also I had sent a note to the listserv maybe a week ago around a new Whisk deploy package as well. So I kind of introduced myself there, and then now here.
Okay. And let's go to the next topic. Any notable changes?
Repos for runtimes are gone from the main repo. Maybe that's notable, or people didn't notice. I kept the folder, so so that the main purpose was to not make it notable that everyone that is doing CI/CD or integration or local development, or they already have scripts, we didn't want to impact anyone in their current workflow. So there was discussion, I think Dragas brought it up, of cleaning up the directory structure. Instead of being core, name it runtimes and so on. But I tried to maintain everything kind of the same because of external people using these repos and running the Docker task and read OW and assuming that the project and the folders kept the same. So the work was to split the repos out, not to refactor them, right? I'm hoping that now people see an increase in builds. Now we're not rebuilding. Some images were having trouble building sometimes, like the Swift 3.0. I kind of patched that together with the dependency, but hopefully we're just pulling down. Yeah, other than that, noticeable today or last night, Travis started failing with Docker pools. Something about Docker Hub. I think it's Docker Hub. There's something about Docker Store, but multiple Travis builds are, the Docker pool is just hanging and Travis is failing. So I think someone in Slack mentioned something about having trouble locally. So it could be if you deleted those images, like the image that I have, one of the images I have is 4 months old. So I have images in my laptop that are very old. So I'm not hitting the problem, but I bet if I clean, I may hit the problem. So we'll look into it today. If somebody wants to help dig that down, appreciate it. We can talk in Slack.
Yeah, okay. So on the runtime, so is it already just pulling from Travis? Is that for the runtimes? Is that already enabled? So Travis is already just pulling the runtime images, right? It's not building it anymore.
It's a build step with the Docker this Gradle this Docker task. It does a Docker build. We have a Docker file, but the Docker file is one-liner saying from the image. That way we rename, retag, and then the invoker can use the local image with the prefix. So kept everything the same. Yeah.
Okay. Any other notable changes? Probably I can tell a little bit.
Dynamic assignment. Somebody talked about the dynamic assignment. Using Redis or not using Redis. Is that clear now for the workers?
Yeah, Dave is not in the call today, but if you would like to summarize, you have the picture, the full picture?
No, I think we were assigning, maybe Marcus would know better, but assigning UUIDs and using Redis to generate or atomically. But I think he submitted a PR or just got merged that Redis is not required.
Right. My understanding is that it's merged, but by default it's off. It's not used. So you need to actively enable it. That's my understanding.
I think in the last Wednesday meeting, I think we already had a discussion about this, about the design of it, and I think the thing left to say is that it's merged, and as you said, it's optional. It can be triggered via various environment variables.
Then probably I can tell a little bit what we are doing on the core. So we are currently investigating on several robustness items. So in the invoker, we are dealing with cleaning up Docker VMs where Docker is running because there are some artifacts left on the VM. So this is one part. You see also one pull request from Sven regarding removing of broken containers. And we start looking into, so we continue working on controller improvements and on the logging part. So Martin will give us, and Vadim will give us an update later on the agenda. And we start looking in the log store SPI. So I just sent a summary on the dev list, which summarizing a discussion between Marcus, Christian, Tyson, and myself yesterday, where we think that the current implementation of the log store SPI is a well fit. So the 3 touch points chosen by Tyson fits very well and are very flexible in plugging in different implementations. And where Tyson is currently looking on its Splunk implementation, we are looking on a different implementation for our platform. And so I think we have a good fit, and going forward to look at that. Marcus, Christian, you want to add something on notable changes from our side?
Well, I think that pretty much sums it up. One stepping stone towards that is a new reading of the log file, which doesn't change memory behavior for now, but will enable streaming file I/O in the future. So we need that for our implementation. It's an improvement anyways in terms of readability. So here we go. There's a PR open on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other notable changes? Otherwise, I think we can go into the first topic. If not, then I think we'd like to hand over to James and Carlos. I think there were already some discussions on trigger management operations, but I think we can have the discussion here now, face to face. So, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I posted to the dev list on Friday about just to try and understand what the feed providers and the state of some updates. I was I opened a ticket a couple of months ago, and I was saw some other stuff that had been asked around updates to the triggers. Obviously, as feeds are being used more, and people have more requirements and all that kind of stuff. So there was, people obviously, one of the big gaps has been able to obviously read the state of a trigger from the feed provider once you'd be able to create it. And then there was some other things around max triggers and to be able to update and all that kind of stuff. So I just collated, I just went through some of the issues and pulled them out and mailed it over to ask what was, if there's any work being done in this area. And I was happy to see that Carlos and some of the other people have been already thinking about this a little bit. So there seems to be some work going on to add some of those capabilities to the current feed providers, with the alarm one, especially to be able to read the value and the Kafka one as well. So yes, it's good. It seems like we're people are already working this space. I think it'd be good to have a more formal, I don't want to say spec, but just like the markdown file with something slightly more descriptive about the operations and a impromptu lightweight spec. Because I think when I've done a feed provider before for MQTT, and you end up just reading the existing feed providers to work out how they're supposed to work. So I think if you want to encourage people to come along and build feed providers, because that's one of the good things about OpenWhisk is that you can build your own feed provider, a bit more documentation around that. And then obviously I think it's good that we're doing the enhancements on the feed providers, but again, probably trying to socialize that work up front a little bit more, maybe to ask for requirements, so that to get the community, wider community outside those people working on it full time. But it's good to see. Obviously, it's a huge. Events is a huge part of serverless, and making the event support as good as possible is a big win. I think in terms of reading, the new read operation is going to be there, which will be pretty awesome, really, in terms of usability. And then there's people have other requirements. So if people obviously have other requirements, then post them to the dev list, and then people can open tickets and that kind of stuff. So it's an exciting, I think it's not been maybe a focus for a while, but it's good to see some work on that from my perspective as a user more than a developer of the platform. Carlos, do you want to give a bit of an update from your side?
It was helpful that you collected all that information into one place. This is something that we have been working or discussing, more discussing. It recently came up as in the backlog in terms of priorities as we manage and scale this feed provider. That was the key. We operate and we scale these feed providers. So we have to have a good balance between user experience and also have a good implementation of the scaling of it. I can go over 2 areas that we're working on, and also it will have links to the PRs and the issues in the repo. I can talk. I have one slide deck that show high level, kind of what you described. But this is something I discussed this morning, that we need a markdown file that explains these lifecycle things under the hood, because what we have right now is a markdown file is a README for the user. Like in terms of user, is like the developer just using the CLI and creating the trigger, not maybe someone in open source trying to implement a feed provider or taking advantage of some of those APIs that are already there and just emulating. I think at one point we had, I don't know where we left it, a template feed provider kind of repo. So I don't know, something that does something very simple, hello world type of thing, but people can use it as a pattern. It could be Node.js, but it could be anything. And also like that statement, it could be anything, delineating what is implementation versus what is interface. And then if we have a clear documentation interface, that helps. So if you guys want to see, I have 2 slide decks we can go over very quickly, and then I can share them, and then we can continue the talk in the issues or the mailing list.
I think we have just 2 topics today. We have the time, so if the group is interested, I go ahead.
No, okay. Let me see. How can I share? Share screen. I guess I share my screen. Or show this one. How about that? Am I sharing my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
If I can make it like full screen.
Yep.
Yeah, a little bit of terminology, and this is a horrible slide deck. You should not have that many text, but in a nutshell says that a trigger, and this is something we need to get better. We always need to get better on terminology in OpenWhisk. So the trigger is the entity that is the endpoint. The rule associated is a trigger to an action. A feed is a stream of events, and then the feed action is an action that helps manage the feed. So that's kind of like the high-level interface of this terminology. For the feed action, basically, people see it through the CLI, but there's the Whisk API allows to do this. It's a share action. The feed action is a share action that you as a Whisk user or namespace have an API key. You can invoke this action from a library, from curl, from any place, and minimally ask for the trigger name, the authentication key, so we can validate that you're the owner, and then give us the key so we can fire your trigger, and then different lifecycle events. These are the ones that we have documented. That we have a documentation called feeds.md, I think, that gives kind of a high level what it is. But I think what Thomas said was we need like the next level of details from that. So in that document, it explains that there's a create, a delete, a pause, and unpause. Today, for the 3 providers that we have in the open source repo for OpenWhisk is Kafka, Cloudant, and Alarm. So I try to be generic as possible for this. So today we have the create and delete. What the Adnan from my team, also Jason also is involved. They're working on adding 3 more events, a read, an update, and a revoke. So I'll go over those, but this is kind of a maybe this is some of the magic that is not documented. When you create a trigger, a feed annotation gets attached to the trigger entity. So if you do a trigger gets, you will see annotations. You will see something called feed, and then feed action name. So when you create a trigger, I'll show you the next one. When you create a trigger, basically we create a trigger and we kind of like jot down the the feed or the action, the feed action that created that trigger or is associated with that trigger. And then we do the client. In this case, I was explaining to the CLI. Most people use it through a CLI, right? Then will be another HTTP request to invoke that feed action with the lifecycle of create. You pass it your auth key, you pass it the trigger name that you're going to fire, and then the different parameters. In this case, I'm using the alarm as an example. So you pass the cron syntax, you pass trigger payload. This calls a feed action, which is a shared package or shared action. I want to say it was a few months ago we added this implementation. I would say this is where the part of the implementation goes into not the interface. So from this point, that's the interface. The feed action is in charge of creating whatever needs to happen on a back end on a system. So the trigger gets fired whenever the event happens or the stream of events starts happening. In this case, for the implementation of the Cloudance, Alarm, and Kafka, they're very similar implementation. This feed action calls a web action. This web action is a public action that you can call, but it has the credentials to CouchDB binded. So this web action would write the information to the CouchDB database, and this is a different database from the WHISK database. And then this would trigger to the notifications a reactive, the feed, I don't know if you can see this part, the feed provider to tell it like there's work to happen. And then in this case, at the minute 5 or minute 10 of the hour, it will fire the trigger, that trigger that was given. So that's kind of like the general rule for the create. The thing is that this annotation comes important when we do a delete, which we do today. So we want to delete the trigger. We'll delete this trigger, but first we're going to read it so we can know the feed action. And we call the feed action with the lifecycle of deletes and then the trigger name authentication. So it will do its work to delete the trigger or the feed. So there's two things that the client needs to do. For the read is the new one that the team is implementing. Is basically we want to read what is the status of that trigger. So the client side, in this case, Annan has a PR for the Node.js and the Go CLI. We will do a get to the trigger to get the annotation for the feed action and then call the feed action with the lifecycle event of read that you want to read or get that information from the feed for this trigger. And then the feed would collaborate with the feed web action. This is kind of the implementation, go to the database and extract what is the configuration of that trigger so it can come back with the cloud and database, or it can come with the cron syntax that the user used, and then the status of if the trigger is active or not active. If something changed on that trigger, it got disabled for some reason. Maybe you deleted the trigger by mistake and the trigger is not found. So when we try to fire it, we get a 404 not found. So we will disable the trigger. And then a human readable string kind of message with the HTTP code of if it was because of authentication or if it was because the trigger wasn't found, and so on. So that way the user will be able to know like what's happening behind the scenes with my trigger on the other side and be able to extract that information out. So that's the read.
One question though, the status would be updated by the feed provider?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and save in this in the database.
Yeah. Okay.
So well, for this thing, we will not be contacting the feed provider, the daemon. Just information that is in the database. For the updates, it's the same, similar process. The client would do a get to the trigger to know what is the feed action associated to it, so it can send a lifecycle event of updates. Today, basically, you want to update a trigger, you have to delete it and recreate it. You have gotten feedback that that's kind of cumbersome. sometimes. So this is kind of like, we'll do it for you. We'll do the create and delete and update that trigger. So you pass the update lifecycle, and then that will tell the feed action, hey, there's a trigger that should exist on the back end. Go ahead and update it with a new configuration or some. I guess it's just the configuration. So we'll do the work in the database and the feed provider to find that worker that is doing that work for that trigger to inform that there's a change. So everything goes through the CouchDB interface of changes notifications using triggers. So we never talk directly to the feed provider. We talk through CouchDB. Different feed providers are attached to CouchDB. I think REVOKE is one. Have not come a lot, maybe once that a user lost his key or they wanted to change the authentication key. So we needed to update his triggers with the new auth key. So that will be a lifecycle event of saying revoke. This one, we haven't started coding or anything like that. It's just on paper right now how to implement this. But the debate is either we do it one by one, you give us the trigger and the new auth key to use, or just give us the old key and we'll find all your triggers associated with this type of trigger and just update them all at once with one API call. So I think this shows with one API call, you can go say to the backend, hey, every place that you find a trigger with this auth key, update it with a new key. So yeah, that one is not as solid as the other ones.
Just another question comes to my mind when looking at the lifecycle events. I could imagine a pause and unpause of the fire. Is that something that has been discussed? Does it make sense now, or did you heard something?
Have not come as feedback. People wanting that, but the on-pause and pause isn't the spec.
And you would basically have a way to do that via the rules, right? To pause and unpause. Yeah, okay.
You can disable the rule, you can activate the rule, but there's still work happens. So yeah, those two have not come up. This is just the recent work that have come based on user feedback, which
and that's good. That's good. If it doesn't come up, that makes perfectly sense. And
yeah, it's a debate, right? Work on something that nobody's going to use, but it may be that other people may use it. So we try to drive that the backlog and the resources. Current status is Adnan is looking at this. I think Jason is also looking at this from my team. All this work is in open source. There's not much backend or this is all open source. He did a pull request for Kafka 217, I think it is, and then he has one for alarm for the CouchDB, and then he has the Go CLI and the client JavaScript. I think Thomas is more familiar with the client JavaScript of there's a feed, OW like OpenWhisk.feed. So I think he has a OW.feed.get, and then that will get back the information. So it'll be good for you to review it, Thomas. So that's the one for, I think I took a lot of time, for the feed management. This is kind of open feature we can discuss later is things that we have debated on. Do we save some information on the trigger entity? Do we save that status in the trigger entity? Do we leave it in the database? For alarms, do we project the payload on the trigger so it gets merged, or we keep it in the database? Also making the WHISK database single source of truth. That one has some cons of it's less flexible. The interface assumes that you have access to the WHISK database. But it has the pros of operations that it's one database that you have to manage and single source of truth. So this is just like random notes I put together around like things that we have talked about, and I can add it in terms of discussions. But the first part was the things that the team is looking at, like it's tangible and those are like easy to implement type of thing. still sharing or yeah. And then I have, is that any questions so far for fleet management before we go to alarms, which is some of the features that Thomas brought up to address that one.
Hey, Carlos, I had a question. Has it come up under discussion that for the feed operations that the parameters are kind of like global? That is there a way, has it been discussed making it more granular so we can actually declare which parameters are used in which operations so we don't always pass in all parameters on all operations all the time, like credentials?
Well, let's see, credentials you always have to pass, and the trigger name and the life cycle. That will be the three.
I'm saying while we're looking at, like, example in WISC deploy, we're looking at, you know, like using Swagger, using JSON or something like that, or even just like we have in YAML, being able to just declare that, you know, here are the parameters I need on these calls that we're more efficient on what data we pass to the feed at what time.
Yeah. So what's,
because I was wondering if it had been part of the discussion. If not, I've got to look for the conversation and kind of log those questions there.
no, there's no discussions on that. Other than that, I'm trying to think. I think there are annotations on the feed action. We sometimes put annotations of describing the parameters. For example, the crown is a string, not a number. So describing that it's required or not required. So those are these annotations. We have documentation for annotations. I think we use them in the UI. That's an IBM specific thing. But we document in open source as a convention of these annotations. How do we do annotations of parameters to describe if they're required, not required, and then like a Boolean or string. And then the conversation in the past of making that into a Swagger specification syntax.
That or JSON schema, whatever simplest for the user. But we're looking at the same thing in the manifest. We want to produce manifests for each of the feeds providers that we have today, and these are the things that we have optional, required, and we actually can perhaps list them on each of the operations as well.
So you can validate the manifest file.
We were going to arbitrarily try and put them in annotations, but it would be good to have a design where we actually formalize it. You know, that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
One word on time management. So I think Carlos, 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, let's go quickly over this one. Is that okay, Matt?
Please.
Okay. Let's see. Am I sharing?
Yes, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay. So this one is, again, driven through user feedback. These are actually customers that we know about, the real people, asking us for certain features in the alarms. One is they want to be able to specify the start date. So they want the trigger to be fired, but they want to specify that, you know, don't start right now. Start, say, tomorrow at 7 p.m. The same thing for stop dates. They don't want to calculate how many triggers they want to get. They just want to say, start firing tomorrow at 7 p.m. and then on Sunday, stop firing. Like after Sunday at this date, at this time, stop firing. So those are the two things asking for that. Then also they're also asking for a scenario where they want to fire once. So they want the trigger to fire once on this specific time and date, and that's it. And then the last one, they also want to be able, just to clarify, they want to have a trigger to be fired on an interval basis. Cron doesn't support that. Cron is based on the hour minutes or minute mark, basically at 105 or 110 or 115, and then repeats itself for the next hour. They want more granular intervals, so saying they want to say start at this, let's say tomorrow 7 p.m. and fire the trigger every 12 minutes. So every 12 minutes we'll start firing an interval and then stop on Sunday. They have special use cases for that. Don't want to discuss that right now because we don't have time, but those are kind of like the things that they're asking over and over, and not that just the multiple users are asking for either one or more of these features. So in terms of implementation, I think Jason is working into this, looking into this. There's and this is also part of the open source. This is for the start and stop. So basically adding 2 more parameters to the cron alarm, basically a start date and a stop date that the user can pass those 2 dates when they want the trigger to start firing and when they want to stop firing. I think with this it's more efficient, also more efficient to implement in operations. And the proposal is to deprecate this max trigger field that we have today, that today is default to infinite, and deprecate this as a way. People are using max triggers to hack around this, trying to get these features in, and we think that if we provide the features, they don't have to hack around this field. So the proposal is to deprecate this max trigger field if it's not needed. Things to consider using the stop date. This is TBD. It's like maybe you want to allow tell the feed provider, hey, delete the trigger when you're done, or specify a set of rules that you want to do, like some cleaning, or maybe an invoke an action saying notification saying I'm done firing the triggers, here's an action. Also, those are ideas around notification for events. If your trigger gets sick or something happens, or we want to notify you, maybe you want to provide us a trigger or an action to notify you in a way of in the WISC system ecosystem to be able to have that internal communication pipeline. But this is just about start date and stop date, and I think it's doable. Jason is looking into that one. I think this addresses some of your concerns, Thomas, for the max triggers.
Yeah, that's good. I think I understand more of the reasoning behind it, and I think this is sort of the clock stuff. That was great. This week I've started writing a blog post about doing more interesting things with the alarm feed, like irregular triggers and stuff, and showing people how to do some of that kind of stuff. So that's this is going to be great. I think this is going to be a good feature. Yeah.
It will add more use cases, easy to implement, and less hacking or workarounds. The next one is fire.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Question there. Where did you get that date format from?
This one I tried to come up with the RFC 2822.
Yeah,
2822. I didn't know that had GMT in it. Someone double check that before you actually implement it. Carol.
Yeah, we had the discussion this morning, reviewing the slides. But it's going to be a string, and it's going to be a day string, and we have to have it in a way that is by spec. Right?
Yeah, I was pleased to see time zone in there, because I was mildly concerned it'd be stuck on US time or something stupid like that. But GMT is a rather weird one to have picked, because that doesn't match with UTC.
Yeah, it'll be UTC, but we want to support the ability to pass that zone in there, and then we convert to UTC and we save it in UTC.
Okay.
So it's like user experience type of thing, what we allow the user to pass in. There was also an ISO spec for that, but this is good point. The next one, any other question, Rob? Was Rob right? I don't see anyone.
Yeah, no, nothing else from me.
Okay. The next one was fire once. This one, they just want to provide a single date that they want the trigger to be fired, and that's it. And then maybe they may have multiple rules that start invoking actions. Same concept, pass a date. But we have 2 options debated between one and the other, and then this is something that we can discuss in the open source community. Option 2 will be, for developers, will be the easiest way to implement it, using the feed action and using the cron parameter that we have today, and instead of passing a cron syntax, you pass a date. The argument for the other option is if we kind of put it in a different feed action called once, maybe we have a parameter called date. It's just, I think this is just basically user experience type of thing of if somebody asks like, well, it's cron, but you take a cron syntax, but you also take a non-cron syntax, that's confusing. Maybe having a shim or a layer that says, okay, fine, we'll specify it once and then give me a date. And then maybe that's easier to, and I guess it should not be called periodic. I copy paste that, like it should be like my runs once trigger. Things to consider, it's the same thing as the other one. Once you fire the trigger once, maybe you want to reuse the trigger, maybe you don't want to reuse the trigger, maybe we should delete it. The same thing for the rules. Should we clean up? We should not clean up. Should be optional parameters or notify you, which the trigger would do that. You can do it with rules. But also another kind of like semi-related feature that I've heard in the past was maybe we this is a building block to implement something like an API that says, here's an action, run it once, like invoke it once on these dates, and then under the hood, we create a temporary trigger and a temporary rule, or we create a temporary trigger in the feed provider for alarm, and then we invoke, instead of firing the trigger, we invoke your action and you're done. So that's kind of open future type of thing after we implement this one.
Carlos, 2 minutes to give Martin the rest of the time.
Yeah. And the other one is, I think I already explained it, interval. Basically, same concept is provide a different feed action as an API, and the user to pass how many minutes in terms of minutes. So if they want an hour, they'll pass 60 of how big is the interval they want the trigger to fire, and also combine that with the start and stop dates. I think that's it. And then the open one about invoking an action once on a certain specific date could be something that we can implement on top.
So some of those look great. I think the rate one is really good. For these kind of design decisions, how do we kind of socialize that to the kind of external community? Is you going to create a GitHub issue or on the mailing list so that people kind of chime in? Yeah,
well, I think issues is the ultimate way to go. And also in the mailing list, both we can say, have the discussion in the mailing list and point to the issue. If people find the issue, they can comment in the issue. We're not going to stop them from commenting in the
so
issue.
You're going to create an issue. You're going to create an issue for the alarm one as well as the feed design.
Yeah, I can create an kind of an epic issue and put kind of this stuff in there. And then for the other previous slides, Annan have created issues and PRs associated with that, and we can collect them. I can collect them into one email, maybe.
That'd be good. I think, yeah, having issue, because PRs, obviously, as the code's already kind of done, I think it's, people might not see PRs for the, they want issues allow us to get feedback early rather than once the code's kind of been done.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carlos, for the overview, and thanks, James, for triggering it. I would like then to hand over to Martin to show us how a demo on the Kemen.io integration into the controller and invoker. Martin, go ahead. You can see your screen. You're talking to mute.
Yeah, I found the button.
Yeah,
okay.
Now we can hear you as well. Thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah. What I want to show you is a short demo on what we implemented for the metric support using Carmon. As a first introduction, this is the kind of a picture of the old or the existing implementation in OpenWhisk, where we write metrics as part of our overall log files to the log files. And then there has to be some infrastructure behind that to path those logs and make them available in the logging and metric backends that are used then. What we found out in our measurement that the sheer amount of log that we write out put a high load on our on the controller and invoker and the queues that we have there. So we thought it was a good idea to get rid of this lower path and get the metrics out of that logging mechanism and write them directly into a metric backend. So just a reminder how the old paths looked like. I just start here some endless loop of an action, and if you look in the logs, we see that the log markers are written out. I will stop a little bit later so you can have a look, which mark the beginning and end of certain transactions in the system. And then those markers can be passed to fed into the metrics backend. For example, we see here pairs of load balancer start and finish actions, and these second parameters, the time that was consumed by that. That's part of the code. The same mechanism also holds true for the HTTP related things we see. Let me skip a little bit further. So we have these markers where we just for each of our HTTP related code that come in. So what we did is we introduced the Carmon module, which is 2 libraries which we include in our build. And Carmon is an open source library. It's Carmon.io, which provides a plugin, plugin structure, and one of these plugins is able to write metrics to statsd directly. So with that, we have the metrics out of our log file, and we can plug in statsd directly into the system. Going forward, let's short. The only configuration that was needed is we have implemented that we can switch on this new infrastructure on and off. We can switch the old way on and off. So, and per default, it's for the log. The old way is switched on, so there's no change when this change comes in. The metrics are still written out to the logs. If you want to enable them, you can just at deployment time set this property, and of course you have to configure the address and the port of the statsd server, and then these metrics are written out to both ends. And when you're okay with the result there, and you think you don't need the old way of logs for your, then you can switch them off. So with that, come on. I again start endless loop with actions, and you see that the now if I do, I think I have to refresh in the movies to see that now the logs are the metrics are coming in here on the dashboard directly fed by statsd. So to see the same information that you have seen in the log files before. For example, I think I show it a little bit later. Fast forward, you see here the HTTP related metrics and some about the caches and the controller. So it's basically the same metric information that was available before is now available via statsd. Yeah, I think that's all. What we also have done is we've written a short documentation on how to integrate an image which contains statsd and Grafana into the local Docker machine or Docker Mac setup, where you can test this behavior. And as said, it is by default, nothing changes. The markers are written out as before, so there's no hurry to look on the new support, but you can do that, and we have written short documentation about that. Let me share some other slide now. And and I think Vadim can say a little bit of the next steps. What now has to be done to reduce the amount of logs that are written out still to the log file to get the pressure on this log path.
Martin, may I ask a question before you jump to the slides?
Yeah, of course.
So this is great, like not logging to logs, not using this IO, this is great. Question, if we have two controllers, can we differentiate if there is a performance feedback in only one of those at the moment?
Yeah, there's the markers and the metrics in common have a part of the naming is the number of the controller, so you can differentiate between them.
Thank you. This is very cool.
Thank you, Martin. So let me say a couple of words to this slide. So about the next step, which we are planning, which we do have on our list. So we have identified that the amount of logs has a lot of input into the performance of controllers, and the first step for us is to identify actually what int for debug and warn for us means, which means that whether we need to log only the errors, which are the errors of the component or the errors of the user actions, and also we need to identify and we need to basically go through each log line and just categorize them into the ones which are going to be there and the ones which are going to be replaced by the metrics. And we also need to create a list of new metrics which we need to introduce. For example, the metrics for the number of concurrent requests per invoker per user, or the metric which will show the unhealthy state of each invoker, so we could easily identify the broken machines or containers. And there is also a side work is to format the log lines, actually only the log lines that we are going to print out, not all the log lines that we have. And yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, I think then the pull request is there. I'm not sure whether it's already merged, but it's accepted, so it should be in a short while. I said there's a short documentation, so you can play around with that. And besides, there's nothing changes if you don't do anything.
Great. I think we should have a separate discussion then here in the meeting if you, or in a pull request once you have categorized that log lines. So I think that would be important to get an agreement, because it might impact the way we are operating OpenWhisk. So we need to have enough information, though it's not that easy, though we need to have enough information to debug the system, but also have as less as possible log lines.
Yeah, I think this is the difficulty to get the balance between the logs that we really need for operation and still have a reduction of the logs to get the pressure off. And of course, we need a kind of a community understanding what kind of errors we will show per default. And
one additional thing is that we want to have the ability to dynamically turn or switch the log level. So in case you have an issue in operation, that you can turn off for one controller the debug level to the log level to debug, so that you can do that without a restart of the controller. So that would also be, I think, a must-have from an operational perspective. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. I think we are on top of the hour. Last agenda item would be to find a volunteer for next meeting. I know that, Rob, that you were interested in the past of hosting one. So would you be available? Otherwise, any other volunteer?
Rob had to disappear for some something. So Rob's just.
So James, you are interested since you're talking.
Let me check my calendar. Would that be that? Is that the 8th of November?
In 2 weeks, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, cool. Great. If not, if something we can change, so just announce it via the dev list. Okay, cool. Then I think we are done for today. Thank you. Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thank you.